Okay, so we're going to work through some loop examples. If you notice over here, I have an Excel spreadsheet, and this is where our values are actually going to print out for the various loop statements. So to get started, we're going to start with the do while loop example. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is declare a variable, and then we're just going to go through some Excel-specific code that lets us know to work with this workbook, which sheet to work at, and which cell to start at. And then we're going to assign a value, the first value, which is going to be 1. Now, our condition is that this loop will run while I is less than 11. And if you notice that as we step through our loop function, we end up increasing the value of I by 1. So let's go ahead and start stepping through our code. And if you notice, look over here on the spreadsheet, and you'll see the values print out here. So we start with I equals 1, which meets our condition. I equals 2, and it's going to step through it. And if you notice, it's printing out the values over here. So we're going to keep going. We're at 6, 7, 9. We're now at 10. And now what happens is we're at 11. So our condition is no longer met. This is no longer valid. So what's going to happen is it's going to actually step right past the loop statement and go to end sub. And that's going to end that loop. So for this particular loop statement, the code ran while the value was less than 11. Okay, so now we're going to do another example, which is the do until loop. Same thing as before, our values are going to print out over here as we step through the code. So here we start off with I equals 1, and this is going to continue until I equals 11. And again, notice we're incrementing the value of I by 1. And now our value of I is 10. Now it's 11, so it's going to with the loop, and it's going to bypass the end sub. Okay, now we're at the for next loop, and this is going to be a little different. We're still going to declare a variable. We're still going to have the same standard Excel code, but if you notice here, whenever we actually get to our loop statement, it's going to look a little bit different. Here we have our value I, and it's going to range from 1 to 10, and it's not declared until we get to this loop statement. And if you notice, instead of having I increment with an arithmetic, it simply steps through to the next value by going next I. So same outcome. Now, one of the things I want you to notice is that this stepped with an increment of 1. I'm going to repeat the same process. I'm going to clear our sheet. We're going to do the same thing, only this time I'm going to have it step by increments of 2. And let's see what happens. Notice that it's stepping through the range at increments of 2. So that means it's only going to print half as many variables and only step through half as many variables. The main thing to remember when working with a for next loop is that these boundary conditions determine when the loop will begin and when the loop will end. What I have here is something I've labeled a do unless loop. There is no such thing. This is actually just a generic loop. What I want you to notice that, just like before, we've declared our variable, we assign it a value. But if you notice here and here at the bottom, here where we have our do statement and here where we have our loop statement, we have no conditions stated. The condition is actually in the middle of the code. So what happens here is once I reaches a certain value, then the loop is exited. So let's go ahead and step through it. We've assigned our value of 1 to I. Now let's see what happens. And if you notice over here, it's going to print out. Now our value of I is 10. If I is 10, then it's going to exit. And there we go. Now, what I have here is a nested loop example. So what I want you to note is how I have my column headings of column 1 through 10 and rows 1 through 10. Then if we look through our code, we have a few more variables that we've declared. Again, we have our standard Excel code. But what I want you to notice is that the first thing I do is my primary loop is a for next loop, and so is my secondary loop or my nested loop. So I'm going to go ahead and step 1 through 10 for each row, and every increment or every time I step through this, I'm going to go through all the columns. So let's see how that looks. So we declared our variable. Here we go. Watch how it's filling in over here. And if you notice, as it's filling in, it steps through all of the columns before it goes on to the next row. So watch here. We have 2 more. It's going to go through this nested loop again. Now it's going to go to the next row. And it's going to fill that one in. I'm going to go ahead and show you that again real quick. I'm just going to hold down F8 and let this run through. And if you watch over here as it prints out. And this is just to give you a better idea of how a nested loop works. And again, because we're working Excel, a lot of this code here in the middle that we're actually looping through is just to give direction of where we want our values printed on a spreadsheet. Okay, what we're looking at here is a for each loop. For each loops are typically used when working with arrays or selections. In this case, we have an array that is the size of 1 to 10. In this case, what we're going to use an array for is to declare multiple variables. Instead of declaring array 1, array 2, array 3, and so on to array 10, we're going to use one array to take the place of 10 variables. So let me step through the code real quick. Here we've assigned our variable a value. And here we're going to use a for next loop to work from the low end of the array, 1, to the upper end of the array, 10, lower bound and upper bound. And for each item in the array, each element, we're going to assign it a value. So here we are just looping through and we're just loading the array. So now what we're going to do is we're going to loop through each element or each array value within this array. And that's where we're going to print our value from. So if you notice over here, this is where our information is going to print out at. And what I'm doing is I'm going through each item that we've loaded earlier into the array. All right, for a loops exercise, what we want to do is we want to do a problem kind of like what we see here. So we want to set up a spreadsheet like what we see here and put down some variables. Part A is that we want to use a for next loop in a procedure that should create about 20 entries, and we want to have it list values for x in increments of 2. So 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. Part B, we want to write a procedure that uses a do while loop. For this one, we want to have it assign values to y that go in increments of 5. So 5, 10, 15, and so on. Finally, part C, we want to go ahead and write a procedure that uses any kind of loop. And what we want to do is we want to add x and y together and assign that value to z. This exercise involves using a nested loop. For this one, what we want to do is we want to create a multiplication table, and we want to create a procedure that'll fill in the multiplication table. So that's a brief overview of the various types of loops, how they function, and how to use them. If you found this video useful, please click like and share with others. Thank you.